is highly effective right now because there is such a large talent market. So if the table turns and we think back to even 10 years ago where there was never enough people,
Right.
do we get back to that place? And if so, how does that change the model? Does it change the model?
So Jeff, tell us about Peak. It's a tremendous organization that you and like-minded colleagues have established that really amplifies the value and the need of fractional work.
Yeah, so it's been really exciting. So just from a overall background, 20 years in life sciences recruitment, really, and and speaking to kind of like that third party consulting and contracting labor force, that's really where I began my career, is recruiting those types of roles. And so over time, moving through big pharma and CRO, and then eventually settling the past maybe 10 years or so in everything from stealth startup to small, mid-size, pharma, biotech, med device companies, looking at, how do we build teams? How do we efficiently move talent in tandem with the development pipeline? Getting drugs not only under development through the approval process, but then commercialized and marketed and, phase 4 tested, all of that. So it's been a lot of fun, been able to operate, not only across the US, but across 5 continents, and getting hands-on with, I think, over 3,500 individual hires of some sort of, professional scope. So it's been a great journey from like an education perspective, and be able to see a lot of companies, how they work, many roles, always learning something new, right? That's kind of always fed me. And the reason that's, I've always found it, or at least in the past few years, worked against people's advice to walk away, right? When the market gets down, it's just, it's fascinating.
It's a sign of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Doing things that people advise you not to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, my transition into fractional work, because I've really always operated either as like an agency recruiter, or embedded, as a part of a recruitment team. With Peak, what we've been building is we've seen this need for really, like leadership advisory services in that middle market. So we've got the big players, operating with the, Fortune 500, but there's so many excellent mid-market companies that have equivalent challenges, need access to talent. And so where Peak is coming in is not solely from a talent perspective, although people first is kind of our focus and I think our differentiator. But it, can look like PE-backed organization, or venture capital, strat plans, due diligence, capital raise, capital deployment. And so we're coming in to not only advise on how to, activate in these areas, but as fractional operators ourselves, we can build out the strategy, and then we can implement, we can do the work and move the needle. And so that's where we've seen really rapid success. And from our people first perspective, the idea that you could build all the strategies you want, and you can have a phenomenal strategy in a 100-page deck that looks like gold, but if the team in place isn't able to operationalize that, or it's outside of their capabilities, you're kind of dead in the water.
Yeah.
And that's what I think organizations see time and time again, is that you have consultancy come in, build out something that they're just not capable of delivering on. So now you're either turning over talent or scrapping the plan and calling it a loss as far as that investment. What we're doing is looking at the talent that got you to where you are, right? Especially with all like the private equity companies we're working with, they were acquired for a reason. They're acquired because they've got these phenomenal teams that gotten to a point where they're ready to really accelerate and scale. And so why muddy that? Why, come in, buy it, and disband? Everyone has gotten you to this new starting line. So we're evaluating the talent. We're figuring out who is capable of what. And if you think about the landscape of not just performance and, what is human potential, right? What is an individual's potential, and what is their line of performance? That kind of tells you where they are today, where they can go, but then also capacity, right? There's only so many hours in a day, and days in a week. So when you're building a strategy, you have to align with what is the potential for someone today and tomorrow. How do they perform against that potential? And then what is their capacity? And that capacity piece becomes really key, especially in thinking about it through a fractional lens, in that you may hit a wall. So maybe we're implementing AI into an organization to help it scale, and the CFO really needs to be leading the charge. Maybe we want to save hours within the finance suite, and the CFO is already working 70 hours a week. But we know that an AI implementation is going to take 20 hours additional work a week for this person. Couple ways to solve that, right? We can either bring in a fractional CFO with a background in AI deployment to take on and deliver that project, or we can bring in a fractional CFO or a striated team to take workload off the CFO's slate. If you CFO again looking at hours at or 30 or 40, so that they can focus on this new core initiative. So that's the type of work that we're doing. It's a lot of fun. I think creates a ton of opportunity just in the general marketplace, and it's been amazing to see the rapid growth and the kind of the adoption. Companies are hungry for, I think, the nimbleness that this offers.
Well, congratulations. You got almost instantaneous validation of that model with your first foray.
Yeah, it's been quick, so which is great.
I mean, when you told me about that, I was just blown away. And now you have all these additional requests. So it's just, the world is your oyster.
I think it can be everyone's oyster, is what I like to think. And I'm biased, right? Because I'm a talent guy. It always comes down to people.
Yeah.
So if you're doing right by people, you're leading the organization forward. Everyone needs profitability. Everybody needs bottom line returns. But there's also, this real human component that people aren't numbers. They're not dashes on a spreadsheet, right? It's like they're families, they're professionals, they're individuals, and there's all these stories and care that goes into that piece too.
Absolutely.
And if you can harness it, then really sky's the limit.
Absolutely. And it starts with getting the right people with the right skills, the right experience.
So you just taken on a new role. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I'm super excited. And this really kind of dovetails into what we've been talking about today, Jeff, in that I was approached by a couple of CEOs, helped with projects. Then I did some fractional roles. And the company I'm now with as an executive vice president of advisory services for Propel Health Medical Affairs, which is a unit of Propel Health, exemplifies the fractional type of work that we've been talking about in this podcast series. And it actually started out as a fractional role where I was consulting with Propel Health, and then it turned into a full-time job. But what's unique about it is there's a fractional component to it. So it's an advisory service. So what it is soup to nuts medical affairs advisory services. So we come in, we assess a company, we can help them with their publications, we can help them from an HUR real world evidence perspective, evidence generation, providing consultative recommendations of things that they should be mindful of. And those organizations that actually bring that type of perspective in early are the ones who are going to seize the opportunity down the road, because then they see, hey, there's an opportunity for us to integrate real world evidence generation in our clinical development program. And they may end up saving time. They'll gain opportunity to bring forward important information during the peri-launch phase, for example, before they get the approval, when they're talking to payers during the pre-information exchange. Those type of things, not all organizations are mindful of, and being able to provide some perspective based on years of experience to organizations that are receptive to that are forward thinking enough, it can really pay dividends down the road, in maybe not having to do a post-approval study or having information sooner. And
That's incredible.
we come in to an organization and take a look at what they're doing, advise them on things that maybe they hadn't thought of that could really amplify what their strategic imperatives are, what they're trying to achieve in terms of improving patient lives and so forth. And it's just been tremendous. So it's an example of an evolution of a fractional role, a consulting role that has turned into a full-time role, but yet it still has a consultative component to it, because providing recommendations of things that a med affairs organization should probably be thinking about, and different approaches for setting them up for launch success. And so I'm super excited about this opportunity, and it just really kind of amplifies the evolution of, for me personally, a fractional role actually turning into a full
Right.
role.
Right.
So
Fun.
it's really fun. And you get exposure to a lot of different organizations and the things that they're trying to do. And based on my 20 years of med affairs experience, they're like, hey, this is something you should really consider. And if you did it at this stage and you did it in this manner, you could probably gain some efficiencies, or you might be able to amplify what you originally sought out to do. Now, when I was a fractional leader for a company earlier this year, there were things that they weren't aware of that you could do and incorporate into your clinical development program. And they took those things pretty seriously. And if they implemented them, they might be able to reap the benefits of integrating and obtaining real world evidence earlier in the process of executing their registrational trials. You know, being mindful of engaging early, asking critical questions, and getting outside perspective can actually be very beneficial to an organization.
And as far as how you're addressing the market, is this something specific to like small and mid-size organizations? Is there the same appetite within big pharma?
I, in big pharma, they typically have all these functions and so forth. So, in my humble opinion, and in my experience, it really lends itself to a startup or an organization that maybe is, been around for a few years, but are hitting that critical stage of between phase 2 and phase 3, when when they know that they have a PDUFA date, that they have a critical data readout, and they have to be ready to implement, potentially hiring a field medical team to implement some of the key things that you do pre-launch. You have to develop all the materials to train the MSLs. What are the things that you're going to do with your advocacy groups and your medical societies in a collaborative fashion to really amplify your leadership position as an innovator for a different approach for potentially disease modification? There's certain things that you can and should do that will increase your chances of being successful in preparing the medical community as well as the market down the road when you pass the baton on to commercial, when they're ready to start engaging. Being planful, being forward thinking, and asking critical questions about what are the things we haven't thought of, or what are some creative solutions to really positioning ourselves in a differentiated way in a crowded particular therapeutic area where there's competing products that are really close to when we will come out, and how are we going to differentiate based on the science and the safety of our asset versus what their data is suggesting. And there's certain things that you can creatively do that will really amplify and increase your chances of launch success.